And so we are recording now as well. And I believe we should be going live as well. And I'm going to actually have Sergio come on screen. Oh, wait, he's okay. Did we lose Sergio?
Yeah, he was in here for a second.
Okay. All right, I think we've got him back on. All right, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyid al-Mursaleen. Wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri. Wahlul uqdatun min lisani yafqahu qawli. Assalamu alaikum. Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Maryland Office of the Council on American Islamic Relations, I would like to welcome you all to our webinar this evening entitled Election 2020, Everything You Need to Know About the Maryland Election this November. Everything you need to know to vote in Maryland this November. My name is Zainab Chaudhry. I'm the director of Cair's office here in Maryland, and it's my honor to co-host tonight's conversation with our government affairs intern, Huzaifa Muhammad, who is joining us from Ellicott City. Huzaifa, how are you doing?
I'm good. How about yourself?
I'm doing well, alhamdulillah. The weather is starting to get a little bit better. It was raining earlier, so it's good to see the blessings come down from the sky, but it's definitely glad that it stopped raining. So
Definitely.
So for tonight's conversation, Huzaifa, did you want to talk a little bit about CAIR as an organization and segue into our keynote speaker?
Definitely. So the Council on American Islamic Relations is the largest Muslim civil rights organization and advocacy organization in the United States. Our Maryland office was actually established in January 2018. CAIR's mission is to protect civil rights and enhance the understanding of Islam and promote justice and empower American Muslims. So that's our main goal today as well. And before we move on to the panelists, I want to first introduce Imam Suhaib Webb. He's going to be our guest speaker for today. He's going to be sharing some thoughts on the upcoming election. So Imam Suhaib Webb is the founder of the Online Institute of Swiss, which focuses on developing Islamic literacy. He also serves as a resident scholar at the Islamic Center at New York University and teaches a course at NYU on Islamic law and ethics. He is an adjunct assistant professor of public service of NYU's Robert F. Wagner Graduate School of Public Service. He also has a degree in education from the University of Central Oklahoma and in Islamic law from Al-Azhar University in Cairo. He was named as a faith leader to watch by the Center for American Progress in 2016 and selected by the Muslim community as one of CNN's 25 most influential leaders, as well as one of 500 of the most influential Muslims by the Royal Islamic Studies Center in 2017. So I want to pass to Imam Suhaib Webb now for his part.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you, Hudhaifa. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. هو أهل التقوى وأهل المغفرة والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأولين والآخرين سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. We praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We send peace and blessings upon our beloved messenger, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, upon his family, his companions, and those who follow them until the end of time. Brothers and sisters, assalamu alaikum rahmatullah. There's a really interesting discussion that happened in Islamic history between what would be considered like legal theorists, religious law, and there was this discussion about like the purpose of why God sent prophets and books. It's like interesting kind of back and forth, very theoretical. And a 7th century scholar actually, he said that if you were to look at the last few verses of the chapter called Iron, Surah Hadid, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, indeed we sent the books and the messengers, and al-mizan. And mizan here means like the intellect, fitra, you know, like the kind of normal, balanced conclusions that most people come to, right? Al-mizan. لِيَقُومَ النَّاسُ بِالْقِسْطِ, so that people could establish justice. So his argument, and he won this argument, that the Quran explicitly states that the purpose of sending books and messengers is to establish justice. And we know that this is actually the way of God himself. He says in Surah Ar-Rahman, أَلَّا تَطْغَوْا فِي الْمِيزَانِ وَأَقِيمُوا الْوَزْنَ بِالْقِسْطِ وَلَا تُخْسِرُوا بِالْمِيزَانِ فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءِ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ. Right? That everything was created in a just order, in balance. And we have a very important understanding in Islam that whatever leads to an obligation becomes obligatory. So if the establishment of justice is an obligation, then a means to establishing that obligation became an obligation. Like wudu. The ruling for wudu religiously is that it's recommended. Only when we want to pray does it take on the ruling of an obligation, because it helps us complete an obligation. The reason I say that is if establishing justice is a religious obligation, and if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in fact, there's a word in the Quran that's very difficult to translate. It's even more than justice. وَأَقْسِطُوا إِنَّ اللَّهَ يُحِبُّ الْمُقْسِطِينَ. After saying be just, the Quran says be the people of qist. Qist is like justice on steroids. إِنَّ اللَّهَ يُحِبُّ الْمُقْسِطِينَ. So whatever leads to accomplishing justice takes on the ruling of justice. And the reason I say that is this year, 2020, demands incredible focus. The irony should escape nobody that this is 2020. And everything that has happened up until now in this year has really caused us to lose focus. Like, we don't have 2020 vision spiritually. We may be struggling to make sense of what's going on in the world around us. We're not clear. But one of the things that is very clear is that this election here in the United States is central to establishing justice. Therefore, participating and voting and observing one's civic responsibility is an obligation. So therefore, it's extremely important that people are registered to vote, that they engage in voting, that they exercise their civic right. If you don't believe voting is important, look at the effort to stop people from voting and look at the effort to get people to vote. Like, people are spending money, strategy, time, and energy on both causes. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also says in the Quran, وَلَا تَكْتُمُوا الشَّهَادَةَ وَمَنْ يَكْتُمْهَا فَإِنَّهُ آثِمٌ قَلْبُهُ. Do not hide your witness. One of our teachers said that this applies to the ballot box. Not only does it apply to discovery in a courtroom and litigation, but also when you're asked to make bay'ah in the old times to a leader, or to express your disagreement in expressing bay'ah to a leader, you had to. And nowadays, how do we, of course, not make bay'ah, but how do we express our voice politically, mashallah, is through the ballot box. The last 2 points that I'll make, and I'll stop inshallah, is that we find sometimes within the religious community this notion that voting is forbidden. You are contributing to like a kufr system. This is associating partners with God. People who talk like this, unfortunately, have a rudimentary understanding of Islam. And we have to either say that they are either just out of touch or they lack understanding. We believe that the prophets, all of the prophets, from Adam to Muhammad, are examples to follow. And we believe that none of them did anything which would violate a major command of revelation. We call this al-isma, right? Ismatum kasa'ir al-mala'ika. Scholars of theology say that the isma of the prophets is like angels. I say that because Yusuf, the 12th chapter of the Quran, not only volunteers to participate in a polytheist state, but he actually mentions, like, these are the talents I bring to helping the state. Hafizun alim. And he becomes a member of an oppressive unfortunately, dictatorship, polytheistic system, but he does his best. We find also in Surah Al-Ghafir, قال رجل مؤمن من آل فرعون يكتم إيمانه أتقتلون رجلا أن يقول ربي الله. There was a man who hid his faith in the court of Pharaoh. And he said, are you killing a man because he said, God, Allah is my Lord? This is the first example of advocacy. This is a lobbyist, right? He hides his Iman and he works in the court of Pharaoh. But here are two examples. One is a prophet, and we believe that prophets do not fall into kufr or anything that's a major sin. So if Prophet Yusuf is actively politically engaged in a non-Muslim state, which is actually a polytheistic state, which does not have any notions of democracy, right? It's a pharaonic state. Then what about us who live in a emergent? America is not a democracy. America is an emergent democracy. Nobody should be under any delusion here. Or we find this man in the time of Musa, alayhi salatu salam, who becomes an advocate and begins to speak on behalf of Prophet Musa, and because of his advocacy, is able to use his power and his privilege to defend Prophet Musa. The last point that I'll make is that it can be overwhelming, right? I understand. I have kids. I have a lot of things going on like everybody else, and every day there's, the guy shows up today at the RNC, I think at 1 o'clock. He's not even supposed to speak. I mean, it's chaotic, right? America is really in a weird state of chaos, and it's hard, to stay abreast of kind of who can you, or how can you best understand the information. And that's why Cair, the work that Cair Maryland is doing, is absolutely important. Encouraging people to vote, directing people to resources so they can make their own choices and investigate and learn. Look at Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, who is a great scholar of hadith. Imam Shafi is a great scholar of fiqh. Imam Shafi, even though he's a great scholar in fiqh, he used to ask Ahmed, what's your opinion on this hadith? Because he doesn't have the time to do all that work that Sayyidina Shafi, Sayyidina Imam Ahmed was blessed to do. Now, I don't have all the time to research all the candidates. I can't stay abreast of all of the information. And then you have this massive amount of fake news that's out there floating around. It becomes very difficult to stay honestly educated. And I say that's why it's important to be like Imam Shafi with Ahmed. You are like this with Cair. You can turn to Cair. Cair can direct you to resources. They're not going to tell you who to vote for, of course. They're a nonprofit. But they can direct you to places where you can go and comfortably inform yourself about the candidates that you're going to be voting for. So I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless all these amazing, wonderful people that are volunteering for this work for Cair. And I want to encourage people to get out and vote. Register to vote. You have, I think, until October 13th, if I'm not mistaken, to register to vote. You want to register, don't wait till the last moment. Make sure that you're getting your mail-in ballots done. We all know that that is a concern, right? October 20th is the deadline for that. And then on the 26th, early voting. And then, of course, on the 3rd, it's going down, inshallah. So I ask Allah to bless all of you. And I really want to encourage you to think kind of deeply about the responsibility to be a community of justice. As one of our teachers used to say, when we asked him in Egypt about voting in America, he said, an empty chair can't speak for you. And he said, if you guys don't vote, you'll be the first ones to come back to me and complain. But you didn't exercise your voice. People in this country, talk to Black people in this country. People have died. People have suffered, right? People have put their life on the line so you can vote. So I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless each and every one of you. Barakallahu feekum. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you so much, Imam Suhaib. Webb. Those are definitely inspirational insights that the community could use right now. And I want to pass it over to Zainab to introduce our panelists for today's discussion.
Yeah, Jazakumullah khair, Imam, for those insightful words. That's exactly the message that we need to hear right now in America. All across Maryland, organizations are mobilizing. They're working to get out the vote to make sure that every individual is counted. And the message that, Imam, you just shared tonight is exactly what we need to have emphasized within our masajid, within our community spaces, to encourage people to get out and be counted. Like you mentioned, people died fighting for our right to vote today. And so it can't be overstated enough how important it is to be counted. And alhamdulillah, now we're going to segue over into our panelist portion of the discussion. We are so glad to have with us tonight 3 panelists who are going to help us unpack everything that you need to know in order to make your voice be counted in November in Maryland. We have with us Robert McCaw, who is Cair's National Government Affairs Director, who is joining us from Virginia. How are you doing, Robert?
Alhamdulillah. Assalamu alaikum. How are you?
Good to have you here with us, alhamdulillah.
Thank you.
We also have with us ACLU of Maryland's Director of Engagement and Mobilization and a dear friend, Sergio Espana. How are you doing, Sergio?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me.
And we appreciate you especially taking the time out. I know we're cutting into family time here, which is very invaluable. I think if anything, the pandemic has taught us is how important that time is. So we appreciate you carving out the time to be with us. And finally, last but not least, we've got Cair's legislative intern in Maryland, Iman Imran, who's joining us from College Park, Maryland. How are you doing, Iman?
I'm good, alhamdulillah. Thank you for having me tonight. It's an honor to be here.
Great, great. So our first question, we're going to kick it off with you, Robert. Obviously, you do a lot of work through Cair on a national level in terms of mobilizing the Muslim vote and making sure that our communities have a better understanding of what the scope and impact of their vote is. Can you break down for us how influential is the Muslim vote in America and specifically in Maryland, and what more can be done to get more American Muslims involved in politics?
Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. The Muslim vote is very influential, not only in Maryland, but across the United States. There are 6 million Muslims in the United States, at least. There are 1 million Muslim registered voters. There are over 2,000 masjids in the United States. There are a number of masjids located in Maryland and Islamic community centers. And what we have seen for the past 50 years, the Muslim community, while it was individually divided along whether it was an Arab or Desi or African-American mosque, over time, communities have integrated. We have learned each other's issues. Our organizations, whether it was MAS or ICNA or ISNA, we are all working together on different levels nationally. There are several national Muslim voter campaigns. You have Cair's Muslim Votes campaign. Our website is muslims.vote. You have Engage's Million Muslim Voter Initiative. You have Empower's My Muslim Vote. You can see a lot of synergy where we are all working together through different campaigns, initiatives, and programs to make sure that Muslims are registered to vote and that they are turning out to vote on Election Day. And just as a reminder to everyone, this coming Friday is National Muslim Voter Registration Day. We have our own National Muslim Voter Registration Day. It's on the Friday right next to or near the National Voter Registration Day. What I am saying, though, is that Muslims are being organized in Prince William County. They're being organized in Baltimore, and they're being organized throughout the state. And I've been in Maryland, and I've seen you, Zainab, engage with the Muslim community, and I've seen local politicians at the city council level, the school board level, state reps. I've seen letters from the governor thanking Cair for its work or to the Muslim community, and I've seen members of Congress sign on to Cair initiatives or working with the Muslim community to get things done. And what I've seen is as we as a community organize and we turn out to vote, that's when politicians start listening to us. That's when we start getting great legislation. One example is Senator Van Hollen had worked on introducing a bill that would cut U.S. recognition of any Israeli annexation of Palestinian territory. That would not have happened if there had not been an organized Muslim vote. Right now, and you have certain counties in Maryland that recognize Eid as a school holiday. Not just that Muslims get the day off and it doesn't count against them, but everyone gets the day off because there's a significant Muslim population in that state that politically organized, put their votes together, and put in the people that they thought would best reflect their views and get the business done for them. So the Muslim vote is always important, especially in Maryland. And when we organize, that's when we have politicians listening to us. That's when they start serving our community, because we pay our taxes like every other American community. And that's their job. They're supposed to listen to us, but they won't if we don't organize and we don't sit at the table. The last part I would say is in national politics, you have Muslims in key battleground states in Virginia, in Florida, in Pennsylvania, in Ohio, in Michigan. These are states that can come down to 10,000 votes, and you in some states have over 100,000 Muslim voters. Even when you look at how the Muslim community breaks down by which parties they vote for, it's a key and influential vote. And that's why you do see campaigns appealing to Muslims and listening to them. But that only works if we turn out to vote. That only works if we vote early. That only works if we vote for the candidates that best reflect our views, that we volunteer for campaigns, and that we build the Muslim political power that needs to be built in this country. And once we're done flexing the election, we go back to the gym and we get stronger. So again, as Imam Suhaib Webb said, October 13th is the last day to register to vote in Maryland. October 20th is the deadline to request your mail-in ballot. And you can also go online to do that as well. October 26th is the end of early voting, if I'm correct. And November 3rd is the last day you can mail in your ballot. There will be in-person voting. If you end up doing that, please be careful, please be safe, follow social distancing, wear a mask, put on gloves, and drop your ballot.
All right, thank you, Robert, for your answer to that question. In relation to your answer, I would like to ask Imam Suhaib Webb, if he could come on. I'm not seeing him.
Right here, I can see you.
Okay. As an Imam, you spend a lot of time with many Muslim communities around the United States. Do you think that fear is a reason many Muslims don't want to get involved in politics, or is there anything else there?
I don't know. I mean, you need to see probably some empirical data, right, on something like that. I think in my own experience growing up in the Muslim community, what I've noticed is, and I don't know, I think this is changing now, but I think there was a time where people didn't feel it really had an impact on their lives. And they may have not seen a direct impact. I think also sometimes we're caught up in things that are happening overseas, which is understandable. But if you don't take care of your own front yard, right, you can't help your neighbor with their garden. You know what I'm saying? So I think sometimes whether it's cultural or language, right, sometimes we may have trouble keeping up with what's going on in the States, and then seeing the direct impact of political participation. Political participation, the impact takes time, right? This doesn't happen tomorrow, and it needs sophistication. So I think people are doing a much better job than they were, say, when I first converted. And I would say even within the convert community, right, you had this idea that voting was haram, kind of pushed by like this Saudi understanding of Islam, that everything is innovation, voting is haram, don't get involved. And now we see even kind of an apolitical Sufism, right, justifying a lack of political participation. So converts also aren't free of some of these challenges. And the best remedy I've seen is when you guys get out and canvass in masjids. You know, our sister Linda, who is our hero, who we unconditionally support, and we demand that Democratic Party respect her bona fides. Sorry, big question, chicken. I live in a huge family, so you have to forgive me. I'm lobbying right now for kebabs, right? But you know, I just want to reiterate, like, look at Linda's resilience. Zainab is someone that's out there. Linda called me 6 months ago and said, I'm out canvassing in some mosque in the middle of nowhere. Can you talk to this Imam and explain to him that voting is not haram? Like, that's the kind of person Linda is, right? So I think the remedy is when we're out canvassing, we're out in community, we're seeing people out speaking in masjids. I think from being from New York, what AOC did in Queens with Masajid was incredible. AOC is just her entrance into the Muslim community wasn't curated, right? We know neoliberals and the Democrats, they like to curate things, as do the Republicans. AOC was just like coming off the cipher from Queensbridge, just like spitting bars, man. She just went into the mosque like, pow, you know? and people felt that she was a real person. So I think education, and then what you guys do, and you young brothers and sisters, especially with Cair, is you're going out and meeting community leadership and giving a face to this message, I think is really the key.
Thank you for that, Imam. Jazakumullah khair. Sergio, our next question is going to be directed towards you. Obviously, you do a lot of community organizing. I think as long as I've been with Cair in Maryland over the last 5-6 years, I've seen you in some capacity out in the community canvassing or mobilizing folks and being engaged. In your experience, according to your experience in empowering working class families of color especially, do you believe that families that fall in this category are educated about voting laws and procedures? What do you think can be done more to inform them about the voting process and turning out voters from this segment of the population?
Thanks. Yeah. So it's a tough question to ask because it's no demographic is uniform. But from what I've seen, I very much get the sense that probably more people than I can recall, and particularly in the working class, are aware of the importance of this election. That's what that means, though, is that the people want to vote, are aware of the, November 3rd is coming. The challenge is that there's all these different ways to vote and different modifications that have come in as a result of COVID-19 that I think sometimes it could feel a little overwhelming for folks. And so that's why what's important to do is what y'all are doing today of just stressing the key facts, which again is the November 3rd is the date, but with that said, you can register to vote. And at any point you can do so right now. The deadline to register to vote is, I believe, October 13th. Early voting starts on October 26th, and the deadline for receiving a mail-in ballot is October 20th. I really want to emphasize the importance of early voting, whether that's in person or by mail. We know that there are several concerns around on either side, whether it's folks that want, are having issues with trusting the mailing, so they want to do it in person, but then also there are folks that are concerned about doing it in person because of COVID and whether or not there's going to be proper guidelines. What I have seen over the last a couple of weeks is it's been a real strong advocacy push from Marylanders across the state to ensure that there's as many opportunities to access the ballot as possible. There are still a couple of challenges. One that stands out is that, as folks may recall, when we voted in the primaries, everyone got a mailed ballot. And over 90% of people who voted in the primaries did so through mail. This time, Governor Hogan, even though we've tested out that we can do it that way and figured out ways to further improve on it, Governor Hogan has decided to instead, rather than do the streamlined version that was on the passive mailing everyone a ballot, everyone's registered to vote is going to receive an application for a mail-in ballot that you would then need to submit to make sure that it gets in by October 20th, not postmarked by October 20th, but actually is in the right place by October 20th. So what that means is that we need to be, for those who want to engage in voting by mail, you can go online and submit your application right now or double check to make sure that that's what you'd like to do. And you really want to make sure that you're voting early just to make sure. With that said, I do want to also address another concern that several of us have had, myself included, over the last few weeks, as we've seen the Trump administration hasn't been subtle and they've been explicit that the reason why they're denying needed funding to USPS is to mess with the election, is to try to undermine the election. With that said, despite the cartoonishly explicit corruption that is hinted at by the Trump administration by doing that, there are plenty of guardrails that are still holding strong to where we expect that folks that are doing it by mail, especially provided you do it on as quickly as possible, it should be smooth sailing. You can check your ballot, its status online with your own registration information at any point. You can see when you get it and so on. And we know that despite the fact that, as we've seen in the news, there's been a shortage, or they've been shutting down some of the processing machines. Because of COVID, there's also been a very, very significant drop in how much mail is being processed. So the amount of mail-in ballots that are expected, around 100 million or so across the country, would actually be, they would be able to process that with their current volume, even with the machines that have been put down. So we think that the biggest concern there is about it being a scare tactic. It's constantly playing in the news. Trump is trying to undermine the vote, this, that, or the other, and people start to believe it. And that's really what the main tactic is. We do have, despite how intense the last several years have been, but in particular this year, we do have guardrails, and the majority of the American people do believe in our republic, do believe in our democracy, and we have seen that postal workers across the country, and definitely in Maryland, have been doing incredible work to ensure that that's counted. Along with that, it's important to stress that there's going to be about 270 voting centers that people can go to that are going to start to be identified shortly. There's also going to be, over 300 voting centers. There's also going to be about 270 drop boxes scattered throughout the state as well. They're going to start to implement those, I think, on September 26th or so. So there are a lot of processes in motion to make sure that whatever way you want to vote, you can do. The important thing to keep in mind is, because of how crucial this election is, and because we are expecting a very, very high voter turnout, we want to encourage as many people as possible to vote early, and as early as you can, and to reach out to your loved one, reach out to your neighbors, folks anyone who you're having a conversation with, where they're thinking about voting or so on. Be like, that's great. Have you double checked to make sure that your registration is up to date? Have you applied for a mail-in ballot, if that's the way you want to go? We are very fortunate to be having these conversations right now in August, which gives us plenty of time to make sure that we get this right. And so on our end, to go and to help out with that, we're engaging in election protection support. If anyone would like to help us with volunteering in that front, you can send an email to aclu@aclu-md.org, and we will connect you with our election protection hotline team, who are working with volunteers across the state to make sure that folks have the info that they need. And yeah, I just think the important thing to keep in mind is, even with some of these significant hiccups, which might be to some extent an understatement, the process is secure. It's just about dispelling the fears that folks have about it, and encouraging folks to vote as early as they can.
Thank you, Sergio, for your response to that. Yeah, there definitely are some issues with voting procedures right now in the United States. Seems like every time you turn on the news, there's something new going on. And I want to come to Robert. Robert, what are some major issues with voting laws, voter discrimination, and voter suppression, and what can be done to solve these issues?
That's actually a very big question that has a lot of different angles to it. One of the biggest forms of voter discrimination is ID laws that really affect people from minority communities, elderly individuals, and there has to be greater access to people to be able to vote with less restrictions for them to be able to vote. A person should truly be able to vote online, as it's capable of doing, but it's not. So we're not there right now. But I actually don't know what the architecture of Maryland's voter laws look like. So I can't really go in depth, but I would say that across the nation, that voter ID restrictions are one way of targeting. We see in some states that they're actually eliminating ID centers in predominantly minority areas to make it harder, to make people have to travel further to get IDs in order to vote. We also see a number of restrictions on former felons or people that have been incarcerated. When they leave prison, they do not have their right to vote automatically restored. We have just institutional discrimination against homeless people. So, because not all people have a permanent address, in some states it's harder to, claim even a homeless shelter as a place of residence. And so there are all sorts of restrictions that can impact people. I know, I misplaced my ID 2 elections ago, and I had to go get a provisional ballot. I had to use my water bill and another bill just to get entry to the voting station, and then have them issue me a provisional ballot. And that was really hard when they could really just look it up by my social security number that it was me. This election in particular, we can see one of the greatest hurdles to voting might be that you have to request an absentee ballot before you can actually vote. If you want to vote by mail, otherwise you would have to vote in person. While other states are just mailing absentee ballots directly to households for people to send back. And so there's always different forms of restrictions on voting, depending on which state you live in to varying degrees. And I know just in particular that we have with this hurdle in Maryland where you have to request an absentee ballot instead of it just being mailed directly to all registered voters, that you need to keep the pressure on your governor, and you need to keep on pushing with Cair Maryland and the ACLU of Maryland that are doing an excellent job in pushing back against this. And you have to have your voices be known that you want the easiest means to vote and you shouldn't have any restrictions.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Robert. And talking about this, it reminds me of that quote by the late Congressman John Lewis, where he talked about how he risked his life to defend the right to vote. And he said the right to vote is the most powerful nonviolent tool that we have in a democracy. And all of these examples and these efforts to suppress the vote is a reminder of how critical it is for us to not take that right for granted. I want to come back a little bit to what Sergio had mentioned earlier about how now we're seeing the controversy brewing with the USPS regarding concerns with delayed mail delivery, reports of missing mailboxes and a hiring freeze and much more. Can you spell out for us a little bit about what's happening? How is Congress mobilizing? What can voters expect on a federal level, and that's going to trickle down on a local level?
Yeah, so as folks may have seen, over the weekend, the House came back and voted on a bill that would provide the additional $25 billion in funding to absolutely make sure that there will be a smooth capacity for the election come November 3rd. Unfortunately, we do not expect that the Republican held Senate will keep up to their constitutional mandate and responsibility and meet early to get something passed. So obviously that is a challenge. That is why I'm stressing again what I was saying at the beginning, that while unquestionably the Postal Service has been under attack for well over a decade intentionally, because it's an example of how the effectiveness of government, and it's not something that's for profit, and that in itself could be considered a threat, even though if anything it's necessary in order to be able to make a profit. In order to be able to run businesses, you need fundamental solid infrastructure. But I would again stress that even despite the fact that there's been many years of making these attempts to undermine it, we are under the impression that there is capacity in Maryland and in an overwhelming majority of the country to process it. The big concern is really just this kind of psychological warfare that the administration is doing of trying to make it seem like we can't trust our public institutions. So I would that is, I think, the point that I'm trying to emphasize the most, is that we are seeing that they are up to the task despite what they're facing. And along with that, it is also important to balance it out. So I really appreciate what Cair's been doing of, also making the push to ensure that, for folks who want to vote in person or feel that that is the safest way, that is the safest way, not just in terms of getting counted, but that the right protocol is being followed, that there's plenty of centers available. And so we think, again, what I would stress is just have a conversation with your family about what is the most comfortable way you want to vote, and then engage in that and engage in it. Do not fear it. As several folks, brilliant people on this panel have stressed, clearly your vote counts. Clearly, showing up to vote makes a difference. Our family members, in many cases, or maybe folks on this call, have participated in demonstrations that put themselves at risk on the line to guarantee access to the ballot, to ensure that access is only further enhanced. In Maryland, we've been very fortunate to see that continue to blossom, where in many ways we're ahead of the curve when it comes to other states. We have same-day voter registration. Even with COVID-19, if needed, people can go that route. We think that the safest bet would be to make sure that you register beforehand, so as to avoid some of the provisional ballot headaches that fellow panelists were mentioning earlier.
Especially the point that you made about creating a plan. I think that's so valuable, because actually we know of families now who are sitting down and who are crafting a plan on how they're going to first request their ballots, how are they going to complete them. Some folks are saying they're going to drop them off to designated locations. Some folks are saying they're going to mail it in by a certain date to make sure that it's received by the State Board of Elections by the cutoff date. So I think like that point that you mentioned about having that plan in place is so important, because people who make that plan to vote are much more likely to actually execute it and go forward with that plan and make sure that their voice is counted. So thank you for that.
Yeah, very interesting answer, Sergio. There's a lot of things and unprecedented actions being taken by many politicians. I feel like a consequence of that is many, not just Marylanders, but many Americans won't know about the election, won't know enough about the changes being taken in this election. So I have a question directed towards Iman. Can you tell us what Marylanders need to know about Election Day? Where can they learn information about where and how to vote? And who's eligible to vote in Maryland, and where and how can voters cast their ballots?
Okay, so all of this information is actually on the Maryland Attorney General website. So I'm just gonna, the
Board of Elections?
On the Board of Elections, and it's actually on the Attorney General website, so marylandattorneygeneral.gov, and it should be there. So the people who are eligible to vote in the elections, so U.S. citizens, you have to be a Maryland resident, and you have to be 18 or older. So people who are ineligible to register to vote are those who have been convicted of buying or selling votes, or convicted of a felony and are currently serving a court-ordered sentence of imprisonment, or under guardianship for mental disability and have been found by a court to be able to communicate a desire to vote. And as was said on the flyer and previously, we have a lot more important dates to kind of look out for, and voters do have to be more diligent this time around, I feel like, because not only do you have to request a mail-in ballot, you have to submit an application for it, you have to receive it, you have to make sure you complete it on time, you have to make sure it's postmarked by the state, so it's still counted. So on top of all the research that has to be done on the candidates and their policies, this is another layer of difficulty that is being placed on the voters. So there are three ways to vote: mail-in ballot, or you can vote in person at your local polling places. But if you do that, please wear a mask and observe social distancing because of the pandemic. And another thing that has been going around is actually, like Sergio was saying, the drop-off boxes. So if you feel uncomfortable with mailing in your ballot, you can fill out your ballot, seal it, and then take it to the drop-off box and put it in there directly. So you don't have to worry about, everything that's going on with the mail. Your ballot is in the ballot box. You're good to go from there. Yeah. Voting, Election Day is November 3rd. So everybody register to vote. And please, please vote, because your voice does matter. And yeah.
And so we have a little bit of time left before we have to wrap up. Thank you for that helpful information, Iman. I know a lot of research has gone into putting together this critical information that's going to be helpful to voters before November 3rd. What can our community members do to support people who have special circumstances? And I'm going to open this up to all of our panelists, because obviously when we talk about voting, it's a privilege for many of us who have the ability to be able to know where to go to obtain those ballots that we need to mail in. But those of us who do not have the same access or privilege, what can we do to support those community members so that they are also able to exercise their constitutional rights?
So one thing to keep in mind is that we have thousands of Marylanders who are eligible to vote, but are behind bars. We have Marylanders who are in jail or, for pretrial or for misdemeanors. And we have folks that have come out and are completely eligible to vote, but are under the impression that because they're returning citizens, they're not able to. In Maryland, you can. And so a couple things there. One is make sure if there's a loved one or yourself who's a returning citizen, note that you can vote and let them know that they can vote, and double check that they're able to that they're registered. And for folks that are in pretrial or behind bars but are eligible to vote, reach out to the detention center and ask them what's your plan. We've been beginning to work on legislation to have it as something that's just part of standard practice and standard operating procedures that local jails and prisons provide ballot access to all who are qualified. Unfortunately, it's a hodgepodge situation in Maryland. A couple of local jails do that as a default, like Montgomery County. Others are comfortable with getting volunteers to get people registered to vote. But I would encourage folks to reach out to your local jail and ask them what their plan is to ensure that they're guaranteeing access to the ballot. Because again, it's so crucial. And we were talking about earlier about working class folks and making sure that they know. Make no mistake, the reason why we have the largest prison population per capita in the world is, again, because of how powerful the vote is. And it's meant as another way to undermine people's access to that ballot. And so it's important that they're able to have their voices heard as well. So that'd be another recommendation.
All right, thank you, Sergio, for your response. Robert, do you want to add anything to that?
I just always tell people, if you want to vote, find a reason to vote. Find an issue that you support and find out who the politician is, whether that's at the local level, the state level, the governor's office, in Congress. There is someone that has the lever to power on the issue that you're concerned about. And there's always an election for you to be involved with. So find the issue that is most important for you, and then find the candidate that's going to reflect that. And even better yet, just instead of voting, get out there and volunteer in one way or another. Do a virtual phone bank, do a virtual fundraiser, do a virtual texting bank with your friends, and put the people that you like in power. Make sure their campaign knows who you are so they listen to you.
All right, thank you for your response. That's definitely some great advice for people who don't know much about voting. You definitely got to get out and volunteer, find an issue you're passionate about, and participate in a democracy.
Imam Suhaib, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that in terms of your experience on how our communities can just kind of mobilize those who don't have as much access or privilege? If you could please unmute yourself.
Again, I have a really, really large extended family, so I have to keep hitting mute, mashallah. And I have a 1-year-old who I think she wants to vote now. She's worried about college loans, student loans at 1 year old. But I think what was said hits the mark. And I think especially when Muslims, I love what Robert said about just taking one issue and kind of owning it. And that creates passion and that creates familiarity. And then you kind of scale from there. I've noticed whenever I've gotten politically concerned about one thing, it always eventually leads to kind of another set of things. And slowly I would begin to build kind of a repertoire of what's going on. I think also supporting you guys, supporting the ACLU, right? Omar bin Abdulaziz said, I couldn't be a scholar, but I could fund scholarship, right? I couldn't be a scholar, but I could fund scholars. So I think also this effort goes beyond even just voting, right? It goes on supporting people who remind people to vote. And I appreciate what Sergio was saying is like, don't believe the hype, right? There's this effort to create this massive fear so that people will surrender before they even try. So when you hear that, as you were saying, I was like, man, this is true. Like, but I just needed to hear it. Right? I just needed to hear it from somebody. So I think supporting voices that continue to echo that the election is your election, you make of it what you make of it, right? So I think those are very important things to think about.
Yeah, for sure. No, absolutely. And this being one of the most critical, if not the most critical election of our lifetimes, where there's so much at stake, that's all so much more relevant now than ever before.
All right, I want to thank everyone for participating. I want to thank the panelists. It was a really interesting discussion. You know, definitely there's something each participant definitely learned tonight. I also wanted to see if any of the participants had any questions for any of the panelists before we conclude.
Well, we keep hearing about what's at stake. Can anyone offer like a tangible definition of what is at stake, right? Like I hear it, I think, all the time now as the election is coming closer, but asking the professionals here, kind of what is at stake here in this election?
I don't think it's partisan to acknowledge that whoever wins this how this election goes will decide whether or not the American experiment ends or continues. And we have seen just how explicit the current administration is in trying to undermine the rule of law, trying to undermine the rights of immigrants, undermine the rights of people of color, of minorities, of folks from the LGBTQ community, intentionally, out of a sense of sowing fear and distrust and scapegoating so as to get away with corruption. But the scale at which this is taking place and the vulgar nature of it makes it clear that if people don't show up and vote, it might, the stories that we told ourselves about why we don't vote that weren't true might be the case, particularly at a federal level. And so I just can't stress enough that there are so many different ways in which to claim your power, to claim your rights. Voting is by no means the only one, but it is unquestionably, particularly for those of us who have the privilege of citizenship, one of the most crucial and easiest ones to do, even under COVID, even with all that's, the noise and intentional disarray that's going on. We still have access to the ballots, and there's a reason why they're trying to undermine it or scare us. And it's because it's clear that if we show up to vote, our voices will, that's what voting is. Voting is making sure that your perspective is what's counted. And when you have efforts to undermine the vote, I think the only thing to keep in mind is it's the least you can do, and you have an awful lot of power, and it won't take you a lot of time. We went through, I know there's a variety of different options, but I would see that as a good thing. That means that basically whatever you're comfortable with, you can do it, and let your friends and family know about it.
If I could just add to that real quick about, what's at stake with the presidential election, it's Supreme Court seats, it's U.S. district court seats, the appellate courts, and that's where landmark cases happen. Roe v. Wade, all of the cases about qualified immunity, they're going up to the Supreme Court, and I think, most likely there are going to be 2 seats that are open that need to be filled. And let's not forget about the entire cabinet, your Secretary of State, who takes care of all of foreign policy. So it's not just the president that you're voting for your judges, you're voting for kind of, you choose the candidate that reflects your values so you get adequate representation of how you want America to be like. I think that's the best way to put it, is because, your one ballot, like your one vote, decides all of these things. Who gets to sit on the Supreme Court? Is it going to be another majority, or are we going to have another split court? it's a lot to think about, and it's not just the president and vice president. It spans over all of the branches of government, and we've seen issues where all branches of government have collided. And so it's really important to have those checks and balances in place and to elect people who you feel will keep those checks and balances in place as was written in the Constitution.
Which is a reminder, Iman, that you mentioned that we currently have a Muslim ban in effect here in the United States of America. And this is a Muslim ban that was put into effect with an executive order that was drafted and signed off by the President of the United States. So the fact that this individual's got power to draft executive orders and treaties and other kind of, policies that impact so many of our lives on a daily basis. And Robert, I know you can talk to this much more articulately than I can, or much more eloquently than I can. But this is just, this is not just what Iman said, not just the President of the United States. We are voting in the next Supreme Court justices, appellate court judges, district court judges. I mean, it just trickles down from there. Did you have anything that you wanted to add, Robert?
Just that there are two competing visions for where the future of American democracy is going to go. And you have to vote your conscience. But honestly, there are those that would want to dismantle the vote. There are those that want to prevent you from being able to vote. There are those that would contest the results of the election. And the only way that we can restore democracy is to ensure, or restore trust in our democracy, is to ensure that we have a full voter turnout. On average, 60-some% of Americans turn out in presidential elections. We need much higher numbers. And I know COVID itself is a means of suppressing naturally through just an act of God, the events that are happening, getting people to the polls. But we have to overcome whatever hurdles are in front of us. We have to ensure that there is trust in the results of this election and in the democratic systems that are in place to guarantee that our votes are our voices and that we are heard. And I'm not going to tell people how to vote, but there are fascist elements in the United States, and these are creeping in from foreign countries that also have their own ideas on how the U.S. election should turn out. And we cannot accept foreign interference by undemocratic countries. And we should not accept undemocratic notions within our democracy. And the best way to preserve democracy is to vote. So vote like the future of your country is at stake, because it is.
Thank you, Robert, for those insights. I just want to thank the panelists again for participating and sharing such helpful information. I just want to remind everyone, make sure you register to vote. If you need to register to vote, visit vote.org. The last day to register to vote is October 13th. October 20th is the deadline to request a mail-in ballot. And early voting spans from October 26th to November 2nd. And if you will be mailing in your mail-in ballot, make sure it is postmarked for November 3rd. But other than that, just thank you everyone for joining.
Thank
you. It was
you.
a great discussion.
Jazakumullah khair, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your days to be here with us and have this important conversation.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Welcome everyone.
Assalamu alaikum. Bye.